2 minutes after 7, so let's go ahead and get started. We do have a minion here, so we can get going. Let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed you, Lord our God, King of the universe, sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. All right, so I'm going to pick up from where we left off last week. When we left off last week, the sailors had, or Jonah had told the sailors that, hey, it's me, that I'm the one that is the reason for this storm. So they threw him over the side, and so that was where we left off, and so now we can go back into it. And I've left this. I'll probably leave this up all throughout this study of the minor prophets, because it gives you a timeline of when these prophets were active. And so I'll leave that up, and then I put up a chiasm, or sometimes called a chiasmus, but it's how that a lot of times they will look at chapters and verses and biblical scriptures, and it's kind of a neat way of looking at how it comes down to a center or a main theme, and then it expands back as you read on to kind of a repeat or a corresponding to what was there before. So, for instance, in verses 4 and 5, it says, God hurls a wind on the sea, the storm begins, sailors fear and cry to their gods. And then in B, Jonah sleeps, and the captain of the ship says, cry out to your God, we will not perish. And then the C, it says that we may know on whose account. So they're casting lots. They're trying to figure out who it was. And of course, the lot cast onto Jonah. And so then in D, the sailors questioned Jonah. And then E is fear. I fear. Everyone is afraid. And so the reason I'm reading these things, I know you can see them, but people on cell phones can't see it. So I'm reading through it. And then you got E prime, which the sailors fear. That was in verse 10. And then the sailors question Jonah, and that's D prime. C prime, and he says, I know it's on my own account. And then the sailors try to get to land. They're rowing their hearts out, trying to get against the storm. And they cry out to the true God, and don't let us perish. And also, they're looking at throwing Jonah over the side, so they didn't want to be held accountable for that. And then it goes back to the sailors throw Jonah overboard. The storm ceases, and then the sailors really look at this and they fear God because they just saw what happened. So that's called a chiasm. And there's actually a full chiasm of the book of Jonah that I probably should trot out next week, and I'll show that to you also. All right, so let's. Are there any comments or questions on what we've gone across in Jonah at this point? Okay. So, book of Jonah, chapter 1, verse 9. And he said to them, I am a Hebrew, and I fear Adonai, God of the heavens, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men became afraid with an overwhelming fear, and they said, "What have you done?" For the men knew that he had fled from the presence of Adonai because he had told them. So then then you have the chiasm that I just showed you. Now it should be no surprise to the sailors that Jonah was a Hebrew, because where did they pick him up? They picked him up and he came on board at Haifa or Joppa, the major port, a major port in Israel. And Hebrew is the name by which the Israelites' neighbors knew them. That's what they call them. They call them Hebrews, not Israelites. And Jonah probably identifies himself as a Hebrew, as a preamble to the fact that he worshipped the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, the Lord God, the only God with a capital G, and he was the heavenly God of the Hebrews. Now, the Phoenicians, who the sailors probably were, they also thought of Baal as a sky god. This is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Hebrew God. It says he's the heavenly God. He's God of everything and the heavens. Well, that runs kind of counter to what the Phoenicians believed. So, and it was the fact that this Hebrew God, they hadn't really thought about it, I guess, but Jonah had told him, hey, he's the God of the heavens, he's the God of the sea, and the God of the dry land. Now, back in those days, the people believed that there was a sky god or something about there were gods and deities for the sky, a moon and sun and stars, and then there was a god of the land area, which would be like mountains or deserts or whatever. And then there would also, be the god of the oceans. But the idea that there was one God of all of those things, everything on the earth, the air, sea, and land, that was kind of, for us, we say, yeah, well, duh, that's a fact. But these people had a different mindset, and so the idea that Jonah worshipped a God that made the sea, and that's why the sea was acting up at this point. It was obvious to them then that Jonah's God was after him, and he sent the storm to punish him or to get his attention or whatever. And so ironically, what was so clear to these pagans was obscure to this runaway prophet. When God sovereignly selects someone for a special service like he did Jonah, that person can't run and hide from God. Jonah had not learned this lesson yet. So the title, the God of Heaven, that's very common in the post-exilic books, like Ezra, Nehemiah, Dan, and so forth. The fact that this fact influenced some scholars to conclude that the book of Jonah must also date from that same period. But this idea of the God of heaven that's as old as Israel is itself, and so I don't think that's a good deal. Okay, Carmen, you got a question. Unmute yourself.
Okay, so when you say, no, those people, they believed in many gods, and we're going, well, one God, duh, but that's how they were taught. They were lied to and taught that, correct?
Yes, that was their belief system.
Yes, and what immediately came to my mind is people that are being told today, just like we discussed yesterday in Torah, you don't have to give up your faith to go for abortion. And they're lied to. The older people go, duh, what's wrong with you? And then some of the older people. And then the young kids, though, they hear this. And then, so what do you think? They're going to grow up thinking, and then their kids will be raised. And in how many generations will it take before they're like believing these pagan type lies?
Well, yeah, that is.
That it's okay, completely okay to live like this, do this, whatever. Yeah. Okay, I made you. Yeah. Okay. That's all.
Yeah. Well, and that is true. I mean, that you raise your kids up in what in your own belief system, and then what else are they going to believe? It's very rare that a child grows up and then has a I say very rare. It doesn't often happen when a child grows up and then has a complete paradigm shift in their belief system. That's true. Warren?
Oh yeah, can you hear me first of all?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, I was thinking, because I mean this book of Jonah, we think very much as being evangelistic towards the city of Nineveh, but if you notice that in like verse 4 and 5, you've got these sailors, they're praying each one to their own God, and now and later on we see them praying to Yahweh, and that name is used in all in one verse, where they're praying to the God, the true God. So in that sense, it is a very evangelistic book towards these unbelievers as well.
Yeah. And I think you will see that this book of Jonah is more than just to Nineveh. I think it's kind of a roadmap of how the gospel, how the just the whole story of God and everything is universal. It's not something that can be corralled into just one people group. It's for everyone. And I think, we'll see that in later verses also. It's a good point. Okay. So we know that Jonah, he told him, yeah, I'm running away from God. And so that's why they really, they knew what was going on here. And he really didn't he didn't try to hide anything from them. And I think the idea that someone could be running away from God in their mind was, okay, yeah, that's okay. It can be done because their view of the gods, the little g gods, was very geographic in terms of each country or each people group had their own god, and so, or their own their own senior god, whoever that was. And as countries would fight each other, and if one country won in war over another country, that meant that their god was bigger and better and badder than the people that they just defeated in battle. And so the idea that you could run from your god made perfect sense to them, because each god had geographic limitations that they couldn't follow the person. If he ran from Israel and he went to Babylon, then the Israel god had no sway over there in Babylon. So, it made perfect sense to them that he could do that. All right, I think Mike, if I'm not mistaken, you've got your phone
sure.
muted.
Let me ask you, my understanding, you're saying that the other men had a god singular of a particular moon, star, sky, whatever, and so it was because the sea was doing what it was doing, then they were equating that Jonah's god was the god of the ocean, and then when they prayed to the God of all, they were actually praying to the God that they thought was just the God of the ocean or the water, and that's how they decided that. I guess are you saying the other guys had God of singular, like I think I hear you say, and then they're, because the sea was upset, if you will, that was Jonah's God, the God of the sea?
Well, no, when they first started, when they first were praying, they were praying to their own little g gods of whatever the god of the ocean was for them. That's who they were praying for. But then Jonah comes along and says, "No, my God, he's the God of the heavens, the land,
Right.
and the ocean, all of it combined in one God." Well, that was a foreign concept to them. And so that's what, that would have confused them, and it also made them more fearful that there would be one God that could be so powerful that he could control all of those geographic areas.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's okay. Thank you very much.
Yep. All right. But so I guess we'll go on.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So anyway, let's go ahead and get to verse 11 and 13. Now you will notice that if you got a normal English Bible, that the verses, then our Hebrew Bible ends in verse 16, and the English translation Bible, like a King James, ends in a chapter 17, and we'll see that. So once I get into chapter 2, you'll see that first chapter has 16 for our Bible, and then the Christian Bible has 17 verses in chapter 1. Okay, as if that makes any difference. So anyway, verse 11 here. So they said to him, "What should we do to you so the sea will become calm for us?" For the storm was raging on. He said, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he said to them. "Then the sea will become calm for you. For I know it is because of me that this great storm is upon you." Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to return to the land, but they could not because the sea kept raging against them. So these guys were not really willing to take a human life to save their own. They didn't think, first of all, that it would work, and then the other side of it is that, well, in the back of their mind, if his God is the God of the sky, the land, and the sea, and we toss him into the sea, that might make his God even angrier at us. And so, they were reluctant to do that. That's just the kind of, you got to put yourself in the mindset of people that had a whole bunch of little g gods for every entity around them. And so, so we see that rather than becoming God's instrument of salvation, Jonah had actually become an object of destruction and death, potential death, because he rebelled against God. So, the sailors might have known what to do with Jonah had he been a criminal, like guilty of some kind of a crime like murder or treason or something like that. Or if he had, they figured, okay, if he was a real criminal, we could throw him over the side because that's okay. I mean, because he was already under a condemnation, but they really didn't know what to do with this case, because here they were on the sea. Jonah says his God was the God of the sea, and so they didn't really want to throw him over. But Jonah's answer then to them reveals kind of a double-mindedness of the prophet. He could have asked the sailors to sail back to Joppa, but if he really intended to obey the Lord and go to Nineveh. his repentance would, surely have resulted in God withholding judgment from the sailors, just as if the Ninevites would, later on they repented and God withheld his judgment against the Ninevites. But Jonah's still not ready to obey God yet. He said he still had some compassion, though, a little bit of compassion in his heart. And so he said, okay, well, look, if you'll just throw me over the side, I'll die, but you'll be saved. And he looked at that as a preferable outcome to having to go the sea calming down, going back to the land, and then him having to go to Nineveh and preach to the Ninevites, because above all, he did not want to go to Nineveh. He hated the Ninevites that much that he was not going to be a part of their salvation. And so he said, I'd just rather die. And that's what, basically what he said in that his solution to the problem is, yeah, rather than do what God wants me to do, I'd rather just die. And so now, why didn't he just go over the side? Why didn't he tell him, I said, look, I'm the guy, so I'm just going to go over here and jump over the side, and then everything will be good for you. And I guess he could have done that, but he probably didn't have the courage to do that. And so it took some courage to tell the sailors, yeah, I'm the guy, and if you throw me over the side, the sea will subside. But I think taking your own life in that case might have been even more harder to do. Martha?
Yeah, I mean, he was a real coward. First of all, to me, his disobedience was putting all those people on the ship in danger. So he's trying to save himself at all cost, even the cost of the lives of these other people. So that was pretty selfish of Jonah to be doing that. And these pagan guys had more compassion for his life than he had for the mission he's supposed to be on.
That's
so
right.
Who was more of the real Christ person here?
There you go.
But
Right.
so to me, that just goes to tell me, when I'm disobedient, it's not hurting just me. It's going to be hurting. It could possibly be hurting others around me. So I'm not an island unto myself in my own disobedience. So.
Yep. There you go. Good point. All right. And so, possibly, he looked at these sailors that didn't want to throw him over the side, and they were more righteous than he was. And so, by this time he realized, okay, if something's not done, these guys are going to die, and it's all going to be because of me. So, he says, just throw me over the side. I'm willing to take that hit. And so the sailors, they still weren't ready to throw him over the side. So they took to their oars, and they rowed and rowed and rowed, and still they were just not making any headway at all toward the storm. And that's you can even be that way in modern day storms at sea, because I've been on ships before that you're steaming for full steam ahead, as hard as the ship will go, and yet the hurricane is still pushing you backwards. And same for drill rigs. I had a drill rig coming into port one time, and they had 5 tugs pulling on this drill rig to try to bring it in, and they were still making negative direction, I guess it was, progress against this storm up in the North Sea. And they were each hour they were just losing a little bit of ground with 5 tugs on it. So these guys didn't have a chance. With all they had was just little oars. So anyway, they they were showing that they were more honorable then than Jonah was. And so they cried out to Adonai, to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and said, "Please, Adonai, don't let us perish on account of the soul of this man, and don't put innocent blood on us, for you, Adonai, have done as you pleased." So they picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea, and the sea stilled from its raging. Then the men became afraid with an overwhelming fear of Adonai, and they offered a sacrifice to Adonai and made vows. Okay. So the sailors, they voiced their belief. I mean, these guys were convinced here, and they voiced their belief in Adonai and God's sovereignty, and which Jonah, he denied that just by his behavior. He went off and tried to run away, not and that kind of showed that he disregarded the power of God. And so they requested physical deliverance and forgiveness from any kind of guilt associated, because they knew if they threw Jonah over the side, he was going to drown. He was going to die. And so they evidently believed that God's sovereignty was so strongly obvious that he just might forgive them for what they were fixing to do. And so they came to the point where, look, we're just going to have to throw him over the side because we cannot defeat this storm. It's getting worse and worse, and we just can't. If we keep on going, we're going to be swamped from the seas, boarding the ship from astern. If we try to keep rowing against it, it's liable to tear up all of our rigging, and then we'd be, out of it, and in too deep a water to try to anchor or anything like that. So, from the sailor's viewpoint, Jonah was innocent of crimes. That was their frame of reference, was a crime with a death penalty associated with it, like murder or something like that. And but the idea of sinning against your God, shoot, everybody does that, don't they? So I mean, that's not a death penalty, is it? And so that was kind of their mindset there. And so the storm, when it settled down immediately, just nothing. And that proved to the sailors that the Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob really did control the seas. And we saw that same thing with Yeshua back in Matthew chapter 8, where he just says, "Peace, be still." And the storm just stopped. It died right immediately. And so they feared, feared God. I guess you'd call it respected, and they were afraid of him, but they respected him. They said, "Man, this is bigger than any of our gods could do." So they said they offered a sacrifice, and how did they do that? Did they do it once they got back on shore? Because the idea of a sacrifice, could it have been? Who knows what it could have been? But you sure didn't want to do any burnt offerings on a wooden ship, that's for sure. So they may have waited until they got back to shore and then offered a sacrifice to the one true God. So anyway, these mariners were most certainly polytheists. They had belief in many gods. So we probably can't conclude that they abandoned their worship of all the other gods and became exclusive worshiper of the Lord necessarily, though, maybe some of them did. We just don't know. And so the fact that the sailors made vows to God may point to the idea that, okay, perhaps some of them did decide that they're going to follow the Hebrew God. and not their own their little g gods. Yeah, Carmen. Unmute yourself.
Goodness, I keep forgetting that. Okay, so this is about what you said about the wooden ship. So how when they were out there in the ocean, they didn't run back into McDonald's. How did they eat their food? If you can't burn on a wooden ship, they didn't eat tuna fish sandwiches. So
Well, there were different ways. It was the food that they ate. Now they would eat things that we don't normally do. They would have had a whole bunch
oh,
of
okay.
say, olives or
Yeah,
fruits
okay.
and dates and things like that you could eat. Dried foods, perhaps.
Yeah, probably
But
dried. Yeah.
the idea that they have to have
Fire. Yeah.
yeah, fire on these small ships like that, they probably didn't. It
Yeah.
was just too
I see that
risky.
now. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Okay,
even
thank you.
even on the big sailing ships, later on in history where you'd have 3 or 4 or 500 men on a big man of war sailing ship, um, it was still they ate a lot of hardtack, which was um, these bread
Oh yeah,
biscuit.
I know how to make those.
Okay.
My my
And
my my favorite was crackers.
And okay, the reason I'm laughing about that is because when we were first going to sea and seasick all the time, yeah, that's what we ate was crackers because we could possibly keep that down. So, and today, I'll tell you today, if I have an upset stomach or something like that, we always keep a box of matzah in the house someplace, and so I'll eat a chunk of matzah, and that kind of helps settle things down. But yeah, that's what we did. And that's what they could have. They could have had some kind of bread that they could preserve. So, all right. So, anyway, these sailors, they were more convinced than ever that Adonai was God, and so that made a big impression on them. And so it's kind of the story, really ironic that when somebody knows God but chooses to disobey Him, and then that person begins to demonstrate even less compassion for others, less faith in God's sovereignty, and less fear of Him than the pagans normally do. And then you see these sailors that are supposed to be, rough and tumble pagans, and you think of a lot of times people think of sailors. Well, aren't they all just a bunch of pirates anyway, and or hooligans and so forth? And I had a pastor friend one time that used to talk about people. This guy, he just cursed like a sailor, and that would always embarrass his daughter because she'd look over there at me sitting at the organ or the piano, and and she knew that I was a sailor, still was. So yeah, Warren.
Yeah, not every biker is a Hell's Angel, right?
That is correct. That is correct. So you can't judge a person by their occupation so much. Well, some occupations maybe you can, but just because you're an oil field worker doesn't mean that you're not a believer and not a righteous person, or certain other things that have that idea of being a kind of a rowdy person. So good thing to remember. All right, let's go to chapter 2 then. And remember in the English Bible, of the English translation of the Bible, that they have verse 17 of chapter 1 And so verse 17 of chapter 1 is actually in the Hebrew Bible, verse 1 of chapter 2. Okay. So, so let's go ahead and look at chapter 2, verse 1. Now Adonai prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Now, just wanted to start this out with on 11 June 2021, there was a commercial lobster diver by the name of Michael Packard. He was swallowed by a humpback whale off the coast of Provincetown, Massachusetts. And that's very well documented and so forth. And so, it happened, but he was only in that whale. The whale, sucked him up while the whale was actually going after I guess a swarm of krill and the small fish. And he ended up having to sucking this diver up. And actually what happened is that the whale kind of shook his head a little bit and said, "Whoa, what is this?" And he didn't like the taste, evidently, and spit the guy back out. And he said about 30 to 40 seconds is all that he was in the mouth of the whale. But he did sustain a broken leg and other things. But humpback whales have no teeth. They have baleen, and so they just take in a whole bunch of water and then spit it out, push it out, and then that they keep the fish and the krill within their baleen, and then that's how they eat. And so you had that, and then back in the late 19th century, there's a story that a whaler by the name of James Bartley was swallowed whole by a sperm whale. Now, he was found still living days later, they says 36 hours later, so a day and a half later, in the stomach of the whale, which they had captured. They harpooned it and killed it. And so when they cut the whale open, they found this guy. He was unconscious, but he was still alive. And they said that the stomach acid of the whale had eaten a lot of it, really irritated his skin and eaten away his clothing. And they said there were some reports that it had blinded him and so forth. And then there were other reports that said, nah, that never happened at all. But there have been from time to time stories of people being swallowed up by a fish or something. But so anyway, I got this comparison here. You can see the picture there of a man compared to this humpback whale that swallowed this guy up in Massachusetts. And the whale is 46 to 56 feet long, whereas a man is generally 5.5 to 6 feet long, something like that. And so you can see that comparison. Well, here's another one here. The difference between them. Now, this is a blue whale, which is even larger than a humpback whale. And that you can see the size comparison there of a whale and an elephant and a man. So I know that when I was working offshore in Australia, we pulled into this one protected bay, and it was a whale mating area. Okay, the whales would come in there at a certain time of year, and we had to be extremely careful with what we were doing in there because, any kind of pollution, we did not want any kind of pollution or anything. And, but I can remember being down on the pontoons of this oil rig, which, they'd raised it up and we were floating on the pontoons. And the whale, there was several times where a whale would just come right up to the pontoon. I mean, you could actually reach out and touch the whale from the pontoon, and they would kind of roll over a little bit so that their eyes were above the water, and their eye was, if you can see my hand, maybe 2.5, 3 feet in diameter, and that's how big their eye was. And it had a little, had eyelids that they'd just look at you, and it was just an amazing thing to be that
Hello.
close up to a whale. So, um, it was just something that was really astounding to me, to be that close up to whales out in the open ocean like that. And but anyway, and here's a stylized picture. I don't know how they got that picture of Jonah going down and the whale came up there. Maybe that was somebody just made that picture up. Okay, yeah.
Your pictures are always awesome on your studies. That's good.
Well, thanks. That's yeah, that one right there was. I looked around for there was one particular one I saw that was more horrific than that, but then I couldn't find it. But anyway, note that the Bible says that God prepared a fish. Okay, and so. That means that possibly, okay, was this a special creature that God created just for this purpose? We don't know. Or was it one that it says, okay, now, because some of us kind of believe that when God created, he created everything that he was going to create. And he knew that this episode with Jonah, so maybe he had already created this big fish that nobody, we're still finding things in the ocean that we've never seen before. The scientists say, well, we've never found this animal before, and giant squids for one thing, and or another. But maybe God just prepared this fish and said, okay, you just chill out for these hundreds of thousands of years until I'm ready for you, and then I'll give you a call. And so we don't know, but it was something that was out of the ordinary. It says that God prepared a great fish. And so the word that they use, the Hebrew word that they use in this is dag, D-A-G, and it translated fish, or, and it can really, in the Hebrew, it can mean a variety of aquatic creatures, but and the text doesn't say that God created this fish out of nothing. And or doesn't tell us what kind of fish it was. We don't really need to know. It just said that God prepared this creature to come up and swallow Jonah whole. And there are several of them out there. And like I said, we've got a couple of examples here, and there were other examples that I looked up in history, but those were a couple of them that I found. And the thing about it is, it would have to be just just an extraordinary thing, because if he's in a whale, now if it was a baleen whale, it like a blue whale or a humpback, something like that, they don't have a very large esophagus. A man may not be able to fit in that esophagus, even though they are huge, but their esophagus is much smaller. But then if it was a larger whale, like one of the larger ones, like a sperm whale, which is not the largest, but a blue whale is, but they have a different capability, and they could have, you could go into the stomach, and they have 4 stomachs, the whales do, and they ruminate in a way. But anyway, it's going to have a lot of stomach acids in there. And so the whole idea that he's in there for 3 days and 3 nights, that is miraculous in itself. There's other things that are miraculous because, okay, you're in a whale and the whale keeps going down and diving back up. And, they have to have, whales are mammals. They have to have air. And so they would go to the top and then they'd go down, 7 or 8, 900 feet below. And of course, that would kill a person going that far down, and going up and down and up and down like that, you get the bends. So just lots of things that, in reality, it could not have happened, but the Bible said it did, so therefore it did. Yeah, Warren.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that I probably would have not waited until 3 days before I started praying to God.
Well, yeah, I'm not, I'm not sure that, let's see, that he actually, he waited 3 days. He was in the whale 3 days and 3 nights, but if we wait and we go to the next, let's just go to the next verses there, because we're kind of running out of time here. Said Jonah prayed to Adonai his God from the belly of the fish, saying, "From my distress I cried to Adonai, and he answered me. From the belly of Sheol I cried for help, and you heard my voice." All right. So it doesn't really give us a time frame. Did he start praying right away? I think I probably would have, man, alive, be swallowed by a fish here. It was dark in there and stinky and so forth. And so, yeah, I would have been praying a lot sooner than that. As soon as my body hit the ocean, I'd be crying out to God to save me. But he said, from the belly of the whale, of the fish, he cried out to the Lord. And so, there's just the story. It just requires a lot. It's one of those things that's in the Bible that says, it says it, and you have to choose whether you're going to believe the Bible or whether you're not going to. And so this is actually the first mention of Jonah praying. He had conversations with God a little bit, but not praying to God. And used the word here in this verse here. It's hitpalel. It means to pray. And then if you go to go back up to verse 6 in chapter 1, and then later on in chapter 3 and verse 8, the Hebrew word, it's kara, and it's not the same as to pray, it's to call out to God. And that's it's a little bit different kind of a connotation as to when you're praying to God and then when you're calling out, in like sheer terror or something like that. So,
Rabbi,
yeah,
I was very impressed by what he actually prayed, because, he's the prayer itself. It says that you cast me into the deep heart of the abyss, and the flood surrounded me when all your billows and all your waves passed over me. It actually says that word that says is tashlecheni, and tashlecheni is from same word as is tashlich. Now, there's a Jewish practice that on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, that people will cast bread or stones or whatever into water, and it comes from Micah chapter 7, where it says, "You will cast all their sins into the depths of the sea." So, in this sense, Jonah is God is he's being like tashlecheni. He's being treated like a tashlich. And the other really very prophetic thing about this whole verse here, where it says, "Deep calls on the deep at the sound of your sinerecha, or the sound of your water spouts or whatever." It says, "Call mishparecha v'galecha ali avaru." And all your billows and your waves passed over me. Now, that that Hebrew phrase exactly to every single word is exactly the same as we see in Psalm 42, where where uh, the psalmist says all your waves, all your deep calls unto deep. It's speaking about the presence of God and how his overwhelming presence and this goodness of of uh, washing over us. It's overwhelming. It's and it's avaru. It says avaru, and avaru is the same word as avar. It's the same root where ivri comes from. Ivri means a Hebrew, because you brought that up, that he's referred to as a Hebrew. It means a Hebrew is one who was passed over. He's passed over from death into life, and kept passed over. And here it's the same type of thing. Like God's waves, all his billows have passed over me, that they have crossed over. It's this crossing over. I just think it's a very, very prophetic, very interesting verse.
The verbiage here is interesting, and it does refer back to a psalm, and so for that reason, I mean, Jonah was many years after David's psalms were written, so he would have been familiar with the Psalms of David, and so. At that point, yeah, that kind of gives us a little bit of an idea that, okay, Jonah wrote this. Obviously, he didn't write it from the belly of the whale. He wrote it after he had gotten back to the beach someplace, and after actually after he had gone to Nineveh, I'm sure. But it was interesting that here he had gone. He kept getting lower and lower and lower. He was up in his home, and then he went down to Joppa, and then he got on the ship, and then he went down into the bottom of the ship where he'd gone below, and then now he was down in the depths of Sheol, and even down there, God brought him with these waves and everything turning over him, brought him down even further before bringing him back up. So sometimes when you turn your back on God, the only direction you can go is down until he picks you up. So let's look at that verse that Warren quoted there. It says, "For you hurled me from the deep into the heart of the seas, and currents swirled around me. All your waves and your breakers swept over me. And I said, I have been banished from before your eyes, yet I will continue to look toward your holy temple." Now, Jonah saw God's disciplinary hand in all of this, with the sailors. Okay, he knew that these sailors had only been tools in God's hands in throwing him over the side, and that these waves, I think that he didn't hit the water and then just go right down. He tried to swim. He was up there because the waves just kept over him. And even in the high seas, we can be calling it fairly calm weather, or calm seas, and nothing to be a problem for us if we're on a ship. But if you're out in the ocean in the water, what can be just a little bit of 1 foot waves or something like that, that keeps sweeping over you, takes away your breath, and you're not used to it, and you slaps you up in the face, and you choke on it, and so even that, it wouldn't have to be a very big sea, and so the sailors would have seen that the ocean settled right down, but there's Jonah out there still struggling with these waves and the breakers, and then it had seaweed wrapped around him, and it's just all sorts of that. I think that comes up in the next verses, and so at this point, Jonah is pretty much sure that, okay, yeah, I ran away from God, and now he has turned his back on me. He's not even taking care of me. He's not even looking toward me. But he says, I'll still keep looking toward God's holy temple. Now that's kind of a synonym for praying. I'm going to keep on praying. Remember, the temple was where the presence of God was in on earth. It was a dwelling place for God, and so that was the center of their world. The Hebrew world was the temple where God dwelt in the Holy of Holies. And of course, we recognize that God is everywhere, and he's not just restricted to that one little space in the Holy of Holies. But that was a synonym for, okay, I'm going to keep on praying, just keep on keeping on. And so here he had gotten away from God, and so now God he's convinced God has turned his back on him. Let's look at the next verses here. Water surrounded me up to my soul. The deep sea engulfed me. Reeds clung to my head. Reeds or seaweed. To the bottoms of the mountains I went down. The earth with her bars was around me. It was a prison. Yet you brought my life up from the pit, Adonai, my God. Okay, so here he is. He's waxing poetic, but he sensed his hopelessness, and he just kept getting deeper and deeper into the deeps. And so, yeah, we don't really know how long he had bounced around there out in the ocean. Probably not very long, because he couldn't have stayed up very, very far. But he just kept getting further and further down here, and he just talks about being in Sheol, which that's another synonym for the underworld, the netherworld, the for hell. Okay, Gehenna, so forth. So that was as bad. That's as bad as it could get for him. And so let's go ahead and look at. But even there, God was taking care of him. Now, this was not Jonah in the belly of the whale. Okay, a belly of the fish. And I've seen several things like that where for kids pictures, they've got Jonah cooking fish in the belly of the whale, just hanging out, waiting for the whale to take him back to the beach. It wasn't like that, I can assure you. And so verse 8 and 9 says, as my soul was fading from me, I remembered Adonai, and my prayer came to you toward your holy temple. Those who watch worthless, empty things, forsake their mercies. So Jonah is now, he's feeling that his life is ebbing away. It's just going. And so his thoughts turn back to God. And even though, he felt far away from God, his prayer reached the Lord in his heavenly dwelling place. And again, thinking the idea of praying toward Jerusalem, we do that today. We turn to the east and recite the Shema every Shabbat. And so it's if you're over in India, you turn toward the west, toward Jerusalem, and you pray toward the west. But and then he kind of says here, those who watch worthless, empty things forsake their mercy. So here he's saying that basically, if you put anything between you and God, then you're throwing yourself away from any of God's mercies, because it's an exercise in futility when you turn away from God and view other things besides him. Okay, so let's finish this off, and we're getting to the end here. But I, with a voice of thanks, will sacrifice to you what I vowed. I will pay. Salvation is from Adonai. Then Adonai spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto the dry land. Okay, so his desperate condition, and I mean, it would have had to been very, very desperate and being in that, I just can't imagine how horrible that would have been. But he's in there, and he recognizes, okay, I cannot save myself, but he, his it's kind of hard to say here, but I, with a voice of thanks, will sacrifice to you. And I think that where he's saying this is after this episode is over, he's on dry land. He's looking back at it now, how that God had saved him, and that's where his voice of thanks will be. And we bring the sacrifice of praise, as it says in the Bible. So I think that's kind of where that comes, because I can't imagine that he's going to be thanking God for the situation he's in right there at that point. So anyway, that's he sees that, he repents. I guess he repents. Now I've been reading the various commentators, and some of them say, well, no, he really didn't repent. He was just he just wanted out of where he was, and he still, when he landed on the shore, and he still didn't go immediately to Nineveh. It was still a little further down, in time before he went there. But the idea, though, was that he did call out to God. God heard him, and the fish came along, dumped him on dry land, and you can imagine what a mess he must have looked like, because at that point, possibly, all of his clothes had been eaten up, and they were all, threadbare or missing, and his skin would have been burned from the stomach acid, and so forth, and he would smell horrible. And so we just don't know, but he would have been a real mess, and we don't know where he landed. And so that was something that, when I used to think about Jonah and the well, it says he landed, and then the people of Nineveh, it sort of, when the story is told, it's, well, he was coughed up by the whale right there at the gates of Nineveh. Well, Nineveh's hundreds of miles inshore. It's where Mosul in Iraq is today. It's right across the Euphrates from the Iraqi city of Mosul. And so no, it vomited him back up there in Israel someplace, probably, and then at that point he would have to go home and recuperate a little bit, and then he headed off to Nineveh. But that's another story, and we'll hit that next week. Okay, are there any comments or questions before we shut it down for the evening?
I have a question. Is there a parallel between Jonah being in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights to Jesus's death and resurrection as well? Is there a parallel to that? Because Jesus refers to this in the New Testament.
Well, I think there is, because when Yeshua said, look, I'm going to be in the earth like Jonah was in the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, that tells me that, number one, the story of Jonah and the whale, or Jonah and the fish, the big fish, was not an allegory. It was not something that it was not a midrash that somebody made up. No, it was a real live story, and otherwise Yeshua would not have referred to it. But,
also, Rabbi, Yeshua said that a wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. And of course, the sign of Jonah was these 3 days.
And so that's, I think there's a very clear parallel there between, and so what happened at the end of the 3 days? He was he was spit up on the beach from from certain death. I mean, he couldn't, it was physically, biologically impossible for a guy to be swallowed by a big fish like that and stay alive. God kept him alive throughout that deal, and it was not comfortable, and it would have been painful, and so forth. So that he got Jonah's attention in that regard.
Mhm.
So I think that what happened at the end of it, he was saved. There was salvation. It was like a resurrection. Same with Yeshua, because of him coming out of the grave. That resurrection, then all of us can be saved at that point. So,
Okay.
there is
Thank you.
that. Mm-hmm.
Don't stop there, Rabbi. Don't forget about Sheol and Yom Kippur is coming up. And where did the Lord go to pick up those keys? There's a lot of little things in there, right?
Oh, there is, and so I'm out of time for today, but that's a good point. I can jump into that maybe next week. That would be a good point. I can do that.
Yeah, I loved her question. That was a great question.
Yep. All righty then. Any other comments or questions that somebody? I think
Rabbi?
Scott, you're
Yeah. I've always thought it was a great message to backsliders. The whole story of Jonah. I've often thought of him as, and not in the truest sense backslider, but he was indeed running from God. And many times that's what backsliders do. They go back to their old ways, or they run from where they know their source is, or their